Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm Eric Spiegel, and I'm the training director for the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship, as well as the medical director for behavioral health and psychiatry at Children's Hospital. Today, I'm going to be presenting a topic that is, really interesting to me, really important in the coming years. And it's about the impact of social networking on our patient population and the population at large. Here's my conflict of interest. Nothing too much of note except for some personal stock trading and some companies that do have medical products, but I don't own any of those any longer. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk about social media and child psychiatry in 2017. This is several years ago now, and I basically kind of said the positives and negatives of it and explored them. I didn't find a whole lot about direct links to psychopathology at the time, but as you might imagine, in the past 5 years, research in this area is much more robust. And I've gone from being like, well, there's some good things and bad things to being kind of a crotchety old man about social networking and social media. It's surprising how much I've kind of changed my mind on these things based on the research and based on the information that's been available also in the public eye. So one thing that you probably are aware of is that we have had increases in both hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm, so non-suicidal self-injury, as well as suicide rates for this graph is young girls. And you just see that it's just rising and rising, even in the very young 10 to 14 population ever since 2009. And if you'll kind of notice, you'll also see that here right around 2012, I want you to pay attention to that date. So here we have another graph that talks about who's got a cell phone. So if you go back in time, greater than 50% of people by the year 2000 have a cell phone of some kind. And then around 2012 is when we really start to see that convert to smartphone ownership. And social media being available on mobile starts right around 2009. Obviously, this is correlation only. And then we have this thing happening in 2012, and it's a specific portion of social media, which is likes and retweets, which to begin with, there was just the social media sites themselves. But this then became really kind of an evolution into what we see today, which is an environment where you're getting approval, and it changes the sort of social matrix within like the meaning of these sites. Correlation only at this point, for sure. Other things that we've been seeing are worldwide increases in adolescent loneliness. So despite being much more connected, loneliness is on the rise worldwide in girls and boys. Again, 2012, 2009, right in there, we're starting to see something changing. Just a recent study to throw in here. We're talking about screens in general in this study, but the younger you are, the less likely you are to benefit from screens for sure. A variety of different studies have talked about this. But longer screen time at this very young age in infants significantly associated with ASD diagnosis. Again, this is correlation, so maybe those children prefer screens to human interaction, so that's something to keep in mind. But our screen advice and our ideas to general wellness in the community should be pretty strict the younger kids get. Then COVID happened. Everybody's aware that that increased the amount of screens that all of us were on exponentially, including our kids. And the more screen time, essentially in this study, the more we saw higher levels of depression, irritability, and attention, hyperactivity. These are common complaints in your day-to-day practice, I imagine, even associated with electronic learning time or higher levels of depression and anxiety, which is something that, that was mandatory for a while. It was very hard. So although this is useful, it's also kind of feels hard to know what to make of it because of the fact that so much screen time is kind of mandatory for life for teenagers now. And the point I'll try to make today is that I think sometimes adolescents feel that social media is mandatory for their social lives, and I'd like to challenge that, or I'd like to change that if I could somehow. Another thing that got me into thinking about this for this talk and another talk is essentially the news, right? So Frances Haugen worked for Facebook, but before she left, she copied many of the files and blew the whistle on what she thought were unethical corporate practices by one of the richest and most powerful countries in our country, one of the richest and most powerful companies in the history of the world, essentially not being truthful about the way it was manipulating the population. And on top of that, some of the research within this had really to do with Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. The company's actually called Meta now. Just that they knew essentially the public health impact, at least on girls, and the connection to eating disorders, self-esteem, and mental health. That's something that I'll go into much more detail. So if you have time to watch this documentary called The Social Dilemma, it's available on Netflix. It is about kind of the inner workings of these companies, and the talking heads, the people that they talk to are people like Justin Rosenstein, Tim Kendall, Chamath Palihapitiya, Asa Raskin, who have worked for these companies, who have felt the impact of the work they were doing as quite negative and are beginning to speak out about what their job really was and how they see it as affecting society and people in general. Some of the things that I found really eye-opening in this is that Tim Kendall up here, who at one point was the president of Pinterest, would spend all day talking about how he wanted to get people to spend more time on Pinterest, right? Because that's how they make their money. And then he would come home and get stuck on his own smartphone, engaging with Pinterest instead of interacting with his family, even though he knew how it was manipulating him. Asa Raskin here in the bottom right, he wrote some software to try to break his own addiction to Reddit because it was interfering with his life so much. And none of these executives let their children use social media. None of them. And then Tristan Harris said this quote in the documentary where he was talking about existential threat and the fact that the technology can bring out the worst in us, and the worst in us being the existential threat. Existential threat is a big topic, a big thing to invoke in a talk like this, but I'll go into it really quickly here. Existential threat, we'll begin with our galaxy. Here's the night sky. Inside this little tiny circle is all the stars you can see in the night sky. And this is just a galaxy, right? The universe is, limitless galaxies. So you may look up at the night sky and say, where is everybody else? Well, this is a big question that, we're not going to answer in this slide deck for sure. The Fermi paradox, which is the question, where is everybody? Why aren't they visiting? And the answer could be that there never were anybody else. There never was anybody else that existed other than us. Or another way to look at it is that there were lots. These are represented by the green lines are the other people or organisms of intelligent life in the universe. And we have somehow made it farther than they have. So the species' advancement didn't make it into the intelligent portion. Only we have, perhaps. That's one way of looking at it. But another part of science where Frank Drake came up with an equation to really look at how likely it is that there are other people in the universe or other intelligent life forms. And of course, depending upon how right you are with all of these different portions of the equation, the latest information in says that there probably was a technological species at least at some point. Like it would be very, very unlikely for there to have never been another one. So if we think of other technological species having been, it's probably more likely than 1 in 10 billion trillion. So that's a pretty small chance that there haven't been anybody else out there. In any case, then that puts us through this other way of thinking about what's called the Great Filter, which the disturbing thing is that perhaps all of these other civilizations that found technology met their match with some sort of great filter, and the great filter can be any existential threat. And the disturbing thing about the way of thinking about it is that it might be in front of us, not behind us. So what could it be? What could this existential threat be? Well, obviously, global warming and climate change is going to change the nature of the human's relationship to the planet. Bioterrorism agents are certainly something that we worry about, like the dinosaurs, where we may be victim to asteroids. Certainly, we've developed weapons that can destroy lots of life at once. And then one of the things that we see in science fiction quite a bit are artificial intelligence getting sick of us and shooting us with lasers because they're more advanced than we are. But I'd like you to think about artificial intelligence in a different way based on what we're talking about today. So artificial intelligence here represented by this robot that's thinking. On the right, we can see the original patent for a machine that makes paper clips. And so the philosopher Nick Bostrom thought of, like, what if we had a machine that was an artificial intelligence, and we programmed it to make paper clips, as many paper clips as possible. And that was its only command: make as many paper clips as possible. And so his thought experiment essentially talks about the pitfalls of such a powerful intelligence being given just this one directive. Because the paperclip maximizer, which is his thought experiment, he eventually would probably get wise to the fact that if it could force human beings to make paper clips throughout the planet, then it could make more paper clips, and then maybe it might start making us into paper clips because really all it wants to do is maximize paper clips, and we might turn our whole Earth into paper clips as a result of it. So this thought experiment obviously is somewhat ridiculous, but it makes a point of what would happen if artificial intelligence became so powerful and it was given such poor direction. What impact would it have on us? So we don't have androids and robots and things like that, or a paperclip maximizer. What we have, to get back to the topic at hand, you maybe thought that I wasn't going to, but I have. We have what are social network sites, so social media maximizers. So what they want to do, and all of them have what's called an algorithm, right? And what that artificial intelligence, which is what it is doing is trying to maximize your use of that product, which is not a new idea in capitalism. In fact, capitalism always wants to maximize your use of products, specifically the products of one company over another. But so the way, and capitalism really is the other boogeyman other than artificial intelligence in this story, because the way that these companies make money is that they trade in all of the data that they have about you, and how their artificial intelligences can use that data to manipulate you. They have lots of information about you: where you go, how long you look at things, how long you read things, how fast you scroll, what you slow down for. Look at all of these data points, right, that they have on us, essentially. And it's not that information that they sell to third parties. That's not it. They don't want to get rid of that information. They want to keep it. And they want to funnel it into the algorithm that predicts our behavior, and then after that begins to have some power over your behavior. So essentially, the algorithm is simple, right? When you open up TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, something is first, right? One of the posts is first, not the newest thing. That is not the way that it works. It prioritizes based on the likelihood that you're going to engage with a post, because that's the only thing, again, that they care about, right? The way that they learn about us happens in machines, and artificial intelligences teach themselves. So essentially, at this point, we don't even fully understand how they are manipulating us as humans, even within these companies. This is a problem. The goal of all of this is to grow the platform, to keep your attention on the social media for as long as possible, and to present you with content that's guaranteed to change your ideas and behavior, right? Like, that's the goal of all advertising, to change your ideas and behavior, but they can really guarantee it, especially, and it's important to remember this, on a population level. Change everybody in one country's ideas about one topic by like 5 to 10%, and they can guarantee it. They can predict it and do it. How do they do that? Well, here are some of the methods. The technology itself is rewarding. So you pull down and refresh, you get something new. You get intermittent reinforcement every once in a while, and psychologists have known for a long time that's the most rewarding. You're going to get retweets or likes or go viral at times you can't predict. It's kind of an unconscious habit. It'd be interesting to track how many times you pick up your phone during the day, even when there's not a notification. If somebody else posts a photo tagged of you, you will get notifications and cause more engagement with the social media, even though you didn't open it. And then even texting kind of has this, where you get the ellipsis that says somebody's messaging you, it's coming in, wait. And then some of the Frances Haugen information that came out was that Facebook was explicitly trying to hack psychology of people to get more growth, is what their experiments were. Tiny experiments, seeing if they could make lots of people believe certain things, affect real world behavior and emotions. So you end up changing your views on things and changing what you do without you ever fully being aware of why you're doing it or why you're thinking it. And I think a lot of us think, well, I'm going to be aware of all this and it's not going to work on me. And that's the way I think about, advertising on television, things like this. We're not talking about advertising, though. It's just you, your brain, and your smartphone, and you've got all these people in Silicon Valley, and then they've got the AI on all these supercomputers that they're going to outthink you. There's just no other way to think about it. There's no way to outsmart what they're doing to you on these platforms. Another way to look at what's happening is that the computer processing power, the graph almost looks like a joke. It's so clear what's happening after 2005 and 10 that we're in a phase of computer processing power going somewhere that we can't really even fathom. Meanwhile, our brains have been about the same for quite some time. We're not increasing the processing power that we can use. So how does this affect our world? Well, certainly we've seen misinformation in the form of false, fake news and other types of things that have been essentially false ideas, fake news, fake stories. They travel farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than truth on these sites. So false stories invoke in us certain emotions, fear, disgust, and surprise. And it turns out these emotions, these negative emotions, are the things that really can keep you engaged. If you're disgusted or afraid or angry, you're probably going to be more engaged with the social media site. And so fake things, urban legends and fake news and conspiracy theories, they're just more emotionally active, and people do not question them as much. If you've been on Facebook recently, you know that Facebook has ways to react to stories. You can like, love, whatever you want of these 6 icons. There may be more now. But one of the things that came out of the Frances Haugen whistleblowing leak is that if you picked that you were angry about a story, whatever that was, your uncle or your aunt from rural Missouri sent you a story that made you really upset and angry, and you clicked the angry link, or the angry face, you're 5 times more likely to see a story like that than you are one that you like or love. So they're not in the business of keeping you happy, they're in the business of keeping you using Facebook, whether or not you're fighting with your family. So the biggest problem I think that this is causing in society at this point, and I think we all know that this is a problem, is that through an old television and radio and book kind of way of thinking about things is cultivation theory. So essentially media, the society is exposed to a media, people are exposed to a media, it changes the world's social realities as they're presented by the media. And it's hard to get a hold of this if different realities are being presented to different people. And we're getting to the point now where we're not able to agree on even what is true. And that's something that I think has a significant effect on well-being. So one of the ways that happens is, like, if you look in 1994, here's everybody's sort of self-identified political representation. Here's 2017, a big change, and less moderation, more extremism on both ends. We have more and more unfavorable opinions of the other party. We're shifting, if we are on the left, we're shifting further to the left. If we're on the right, we're shifting further to the right. Are we starting to think of the other side of the aisle as a threat to the nation's well-being, as opposed to a different way of looking at the world? And then we get these fringe portions of both ways of thinking about things that are extreme or more severe ways of thinking about things. We're migrating more people to those, and they become more in control of the parties themselves. And then political extremism is really kind of a hop, skip, and a jump from believing conspiracy theories. This has become a very big problem in our country in general and throughout the world. So conspiracy theories, why am I talking about this? Well, rabbit holes are things that happen on the internet and social media, including Google, where you start to learn something. You start to kind of fall into something that's related to that, and then something deeper and something deeper. Now, this can be very, it depends on the platform. If you're doing this at the library or even on a site like Wikipedia, this probably is just educational and fun. If you're doing it on social media sites, you're more likely to be in kind of addictively niche things that are just topics that are meant to make you keep using but have no validity to them. Scary stories, conspiracy theories, true crime, things like that. But these rabbit holes, they can take you to some very strange places. The difference between PubMed rabbit holes and Wikipedia rabbit holes, things like that, is that PubMed and Wikipedia really are kind of tools. They're sitting there, they're ready for you to use them whenever you want them, but you never get an alert saying like, you better use this right now, and they don't shift your experience to keep you on the site. So rabbit holes that have been internet driven, that have shown up in regular old straightforward society, have been recent QAnon, Canadian anti-vaccine protests, comparing themselves to the Holocaust victims, Pizzagate, which was a human trafficking conspiracy theory with no evidence about a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., the January 6, 2021 events at the state capitol, just random events driven by conspiracy theories like QAnon. Celebrities are starting to have conspiracy theories about them that have no basis in reality, even our most somewhat beloved celebrities. And then sort of more fun fringe kinds of things like the earth is flat and why everybody's trying to keep that from us. But it has had some extreme medical effects that I think that I've heard people are seeing in primary care practices as well. More darkly, people feeling like the news that they see about gun violence is fake or not true, and then feeling compelled to harass people about that have experienced trauma, or something like shutting down a butterfly refuge because of conspiracy theories about sex trafficking. So we're seeing these strong fringe beliefs bleed out into quote unquote real life with negative consequences, to say the least. So we're going to shift gears here to Instagram, and this is where I'm going to talk about psychopathology, because I could focus on social media in general, but right now I'm going to focus on Instagram because that's where we have the latest data and leaked information from Meta. So Instagram started around 2010. 2 years later, Facebook, now Meta, bought it for $1 billion. And it's a youth-driven site. Now, we see generational changes in this. I would say Instagram is probably more of a millennial type of platform, with younger people also using it. We see new social media platforms popping up for each generation, it seems. But here are the users of Instagram year to year. So you're seeing a growth that, any business would certainly love to see, as would they love to see this kind of revenue. And this kind of revenue is important to show, not just to show the size of the business, but to show the efficacy of the tactics that they use to manipulate our behavior, which is the only thing they can sell to anyone. It's very valuable. So how does this all connect to the DSM and diagnoses? Many articles I looked at in 2017 were trying to relate using social media with getting a diagnosis, and a lot of those were inconclusive. Many of the newer articles kind of focusing on how you use the social media, what are your psychological characteristics at baseline, what you view, how you present yourself, more nuanced kind of ideas, and the interaction between all these things. So this is not the way to look at it. It's more you look at it as you're using it, but then there's some sort of mediator, whether it's one of these things that I'm talking about, something that has to do with you, the user, how you use it, what you're using, all kinds of things, your relationship to your own body, alcohol use, things like that, and then leading to diagnoses, or maybe leading to another mediator that you have. So if you get two of these involved, you get to a diagnosis, or another mediator, right? So I think you get the point. It's fairly complex, but we're starting to see some of these patterns, different groups of people. So there's intensity of use, there's social comparison, which we'll talk quite a bit about. There's passive use or lurking, a type of content you look at, your self-esteem at baseline, the way you present yourself, a feeling of belongingness, or on the opposite side, loneliness, FOMO, which is becoming a problem in lots of different ways, having a lack of social support in your regular life, your body image, internalizing what becomes the beauty ideal in a media, and self-objectification. So lots of mediators that fit into this sort of recipe for having psychopathology. So what is social comparison? It's exposure to stories and pictures of other people's presumed flawless lives, right? You look at what people look like online and you say, well, there's no way that I could feel like that. I'm feeling very inferior to everybody else online, or the people that I'm looking at. And so if you do have social comparison as like a big factor, and this leads to in you low self-esteem, right? So it's a cognitive, essentially a cognitive distortion in the patient's mind that's reinforced by this social comparison online, leads to lower self-esteem. So if we have that, we can definitely lead to a disorder. So this social comparison is one of the big things that is studied, and is linked to many different symptoms and disorders. The dose of social networking, so the frequency, how often do you check it and how long do you go? We certainly are using them awfully a large amount, and this is something that I don't think people really think about, like how often are they picking it up, how often are they checking it, how often do they go a certain amount of time without it. But the intensity is associated with more psychopathology, particularly eating disorder pathology, especially if patients have other mediating variables. I will say, obviously, there's a dopamine hit. There's this reward that comes from getting on these sites and using them. But Chamath Palihapitiya, who I talked about earlier, he has this quote that I think is really, really kind of a smart way to put it. It's like, if you get this sort of adulation online in the form of likes, retweets, that sort of a thing, you get what is a fake and brittle popularity that leaves you more vacant and empty than before you did it. and then you feel worse, and then you have to go back and get more. And this really sounds like an addiction to me. And I don't know that everybody really thinks about it, but I certainly Generation Z that I interact with on a daily basis, a lot of them do know that they feel addicted. They've tried to stop. They don't like that they have to go back to it. So if you have a high intensity of this, and then you have your self-esteem contingent on approval from other people, and you have higher levels of social comparison, well, that's going to lead back to more use, more contingent self-esteem, higher levels of social comparison. This reinforces itself to cause an eating disorder. And this this particular loop and chain of events is kind of what what Facebook knew. They knew that Instagram was causing this in teenage girls and making them a lot of money in the process. So another way to look about eating disorders is if you have just you have eating disorder behavior from this high intensity SNS use, you could also have increased body surveillance. So constant monitoring of your body, being preoccupied with and worry over how you look. Or if you have this other mediating factor, which is called self-objectification. So in your mind, you just see yourself as an object, and you've internalized that you don't look like what the ideal is. There's something wrong with you. And these can lead in these pathways to eating disordered behaviors as well. Orthorexia is obsession with healthy eating that leads to unhealthy outcomes and is as pathology. So even in men, we're seeing some of this, which is new body image, whether or not it's like I don't have enough muscles or my body doesn't look like the things that I'm seeing. It can happen in men and women, or boys and girls. So that's something to think about. There were, for a time, and still are, posts by people that are explicitly pro eating disorder. So they see it as a part of their identity. There's nothing wrong with having an eating disorder. It's what they want for themselves, is the way they project that. So that is a toxic and problematic portion of Instagram that at least Meta gives lip service to trying to get rid of. But there are instructional videos and people trying to create sort of a subculture. So it's fairly easy to avoid this if you don't want to look at it, but the sort of cousins to it are like FITSPIRATION posts. So you know, just here I'm just showing lots and lots of images of this is what my body looks like. Sometimes still saying I wish I weighed less. But as I said, Instagram tries to crack down on this. But there is also this FITSPIRATION or FITSPO content that, it sort of gets its start in saying, like, I like working out, I like being fit, it makes me feel better, things like this. But then the images that accompany these look an awful lot like the FITSPIRATION content that we were seeing before, just under a different name. So it'll be hard for the companies to crack down on it. And I really wish that we would stop hoping that the social media companies would save us from themselves. So does every user of Instagram get psychopathology? Of course not. If you have some of these mediators of ED behavior that we were talking about before, of eating disordered behavior, and you view travel images, well, then this doesn't really happen. So it does matter what you're looking at, which makes sense, obviously. But they do sort of view this this FITSPO content as being connected to eating disorder behavior, even if the people who are posting it aren't really pro eating disorder in any way, if that makes sense. So the FITSPO content can then lead to, if you have the mediator of I define my self-worth by my physical appearance primarily, eating disorder behavior, even if it's not pro eating disorder behavior content that you're looking at, if that makes sense. Low self-esteem can also be a mediator in this pathway. So can body dissatisfaction. So can drive for thinness or muscularity to begin with. Swapping out the FITSPO content, just the number and type of accounts followed. So if you have the mediators and you're following lots of things, you're going to run into the content that leads to pathology. And also the images that you're looking at on Instagram are fake. They are almost always not what people look like. One product out there called Perfect 365. This is from their own website. They can remove blemishes, dark circles, whiten teeth, brighten skin, slimming faces, altering noses. Oh, and you can also set up a poll to ask your friends to rate your looks. So these images are essentially cartoons. They are not what you look like in reality. So you're comparing at home yourself in a mirror to completely altered images. Here's some obviously altered images, maybe less obvious unless you have the one next to it to compare it to. But if you get used to the altered image as being part of your reality, that does change your perception of your own body over time. This has become kind of a joke that social media, you present yourself in a way that is quite unlike what your real life is like, and sometimes pointing this out and educating that it is not the same can have some positive effects on people, so less detrimental effects if you're educated about the fact that the content you're seeing online is not real. The problem is that for the most part, subjects are pretty bad at, in studies, identifying original versus manipulated images. And even if they say, you know, I think this is fake, they can't detect exactly what's fake about it. So we're not very good at this, or maybe the technology is so good that we can't be good at it. Other mediators that I mentioned were alcohol. And so alcohol use, quantity and frequency has been associated with the intensity scores for using Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as social media addiction. And also, conversely, exposure to alcohol-related social media content influenced drinking amongst people. So pro-alcohol or drinking-related content does change minds. And that's what I've been talking about, is that changing the way you think about yourself, the way you think about the world, what has meaning to you is really the product that they're selling. And sometimes it happens accidentally. Selfies, although they are a new kind of entity that, you know, does bother a lot of people. It's not the most conclusive evidence, but certainly if you're taking a lot to begin with and then choosing the best one, editing, manipulating, making sure it's the right thing, that is associated with higher body surveillance, body satisfaction, and lower self-esteem. And if you edit selfies a lot, that leads to higher facial dissatisfaction because you're looking at the one that you have, the face you have, and you're always changing it. So the mirror is going to be pretty upsetting because you can't change it. If you post no selfies, then you have a greater improvement in your appearance satisfaction in tests. So, and then just browsing, posting, liking, what are the different ways of using this? So if you're browsing, just going through and looking at things, that does increase your depressed mood, even if you're not posting. But then having a depressed mood at time 1 is related to increases in posting. So there is a link between the behavior online and mood, and it can be reciprocal. So belongingness, obviously, online is a positive. It can help with loneliness if you find some people who like the same things you do, that sort of a thing. And using it a lot and meeting a lot of people online it does obviously decrease loneliness in some people. But fear of missing out is a big problem on social media because you are going to miss out on things if you aren't constantly on. And some people do feel more social support on social media, so this is a research that should be kind of looked into. Obviously, there are some positives to this kind of use, and this may guide our anticipatory guidance in the future. Those that don't post, they just sort of lurk and scroll and view everybody's post. You never like, you never share, you never comment. That's called kind of lurking or passive use. Passive use can lead to high social comparison because you're not even in the equation there. You're not on the social media. You're just looking at everybody else's lives. And feelings of fear of missing out can lead to, this is a pathway to depressive symptoms as well. Seems to be a little bit different than the eating disorder pathway. Membership in social media sometimes has no association. This is the thing I was talking about from 5 years ago. But some studies have shown an association between severity of depressive symptoms, so worse if you're a member, intensity of use and severity of depressive symptoms. In some studies have been shown a link. Both passive use and lots of selfies can be associated with more depressive symptoms, so that's interesting and merits future study. What happens if you try and limit it? Well, there are studies that, let's say, limiting social media use to a certain amount. So in the study, 30 minutes a day, significant improvement in well-being. Social media dependence and depressive symptoms can happen for folks on Twitter too. We won't get into Twitter too much today, but it certainly has some of the same characteristics. Just showing that, again, in this study here, that self-esteem and depression can also be related to the intensity of your social comparison. So in this study, we're talking about all the different variables and how they interact. Well, 4 variables and how they interact. So self-objectification predicted depression through photo manipulation and feelings of disingenuousness. So we're seeing, this feeling of deception online. Other people are deceiving you, but then you're using it for body surveillance. You're increasing your body surveillance, increasing the number of selfies. So these things kind of feed off of each other, and in lots of different interesting ways. Here's a problem with social media. Suicidal ideation is an important thing for the public to talk about and to normalize how to handle. But at this point, posts that mention suicidal ideation just drive engagement in a way that could lead to contagion. And so the difference between like being helpful to others or causing either contagion or other sort of negative outputs for this are quite valid. And at a very, very, very low level of the rabbit hole, the end of a horrible rabbit hole is a website that really kind of called Sanctioned Suicide that really encouraged people who are suicidal to take action on their suicidal ideation, and even commented on and giving tips and how to do this. So definitely there is this piece of the internet that is dangerous explicitly that you can get to, and that is different than the effects of using social media in the like way that we tend to use it. But this website was, you know, particularly dangerous, and you can find a community that believes just about anything these days, and that is the problem for people who have psychopathology already, who are already struggling. If you find the community that believes that, you know, you should die, that's extremely, extremely dangerous, especially for children. So here's the tips that I have for you. Uninstall the apps that waste your time. Voice your true opinions on and about the platforms themselves. Turn off your notifications. Use Google alternatives that don't store your history. Never accept a video recommended to you by YouTube, because that's YouTube trying to use the algorithm on you. You can install Chrome extensions to remove recommendations. We all need to be fact checking probably multiple sites before we share information. We need to consider the source. We need to do our own research. We need to be looking at lots of different opinions and types of information, and even following people we disagree with if we're going to be on social media, not just following people that we totally agree with. Although I recommend following people that write articles you disagree with in reputable sources rather than on social media. Avoid giving devices. You can ignore this a QR code, by the way. It's not useful to you. Avoid giving devices to your children for as long as possible. We saw the depression, suicidality in the first 4 years from 10 to 14. I would delay the devices as long as you possibly can. Everyone in the audience and in your practices should avoid social media as much as possible at this point. There is no legislation that keeps it safe for everybody, and really it's just a menace. Keeping devices out of the bedroom by a fixed time every night. Just having that rule of no social media till high school, I think, needs to be normalized in our society. Do work out a time budget, how much time children are allowed on screens, how much they are not, what does it mean when they're doing it, and again, just delete your account. These things do not cause you to have a better quality of life. In fact, they eat up your time that you could be doing things for wellness. And here are all my multiple bibliography, and happy to answer any questions if anyone would want to contact me. My email address is Spiegel, Spiegel, @woostel.edu. Thanks for your attention.